Good afternoon, and welcome to Supply Chain Now Radio. We are broadcasting live today from the supply chain capital of the East Coast, Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Scott Luton. I serve as your host for today's session. Today, we're going to be chatting with a well-known supply chain thought leader, Daniel Stanton, and gaining his key takeaways from the recently concluded 2018 Gartner Supply Chain Conference. More about Daniel in just a moment, but as always, we're glad to have you with us here today. So let's take a minute to recognize our sponsors here on Supply Chain Now Radio. Special thanks to our sponsor, Apex Atlanta, which has been serving the Metro Atlanta community since 1964. For those of you new to Apex, we are the premier industry association dedicated to end-to-end supply chain management. To learn more, visit www.apexatlanta.org. Also, special thanks to our sponsor, TalentStream, a recruiting and staffing firm that specializes in helping organizations find top talent in the engineering, the manufacturing, and the supply chain space. To learn more, visit them at www.talentstreamstaffing.com. So let's share a little more information about our speaker today. You're really in for a treat. Daniel Stanton is author of the Amazon bestseller, Supply Chain Management for Dummies. He's also president and co-founder of SecureMarking, a U.S.-based provider of high-tech supply chain security solutions. Having collaborated with Daniel for several years, I can vouch for his true passion and expertise for supply chains, project management, and operations, to name just a few. Beyond his new book, Daniel's courses on LinkedIn Learning have been viewed over 500,000 times. His articles and blogs have been published in a variety of magazines and trade journals, including Apex Magazine and Supply Chain Management Review. Academically, Daniel earned his Master's of Engineering degree in Logistics from MIT. He's still a doctoral researcher at Cranfield University and holds a wide variety of industry certifications. Daniel's company, SecureMarking, leverages nanotechnology, IoT, and blockchains to address the urgent challenge of supply chain security. On a really interesting note, as we mentioned, his book, Supply Chain Management for Dummies, it's setting records here. So it's been ranked #1 new release and bestseller in production and operations, #1 new release and bestseller, you might be detecting a theme here, in distribution and warehousing, and #1 new release and bestseller in project management. So we'd encourage all of our listeners to check that out at Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, any place where you find leading business books. So with that said, good afternoon, Daniel Stanton, and welcome back from Phoenix.
Scott, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here, and as always, love talking with you and looking at what's happening in this really exciting profession around supply chains. So, great time in Phoenix with the Gartner conference. I think a good place to start is just a quick setup for folks that don't know about what the Gartner Supply Chain Conference is and kind of what happens there. So Gartner is a big analyst firm for looking at trends across the supply chain. This conference is where they bring supply chain leaders, really their clients, together once a year. And they also bring in a lot of vendors, folks that are doing things to advance the capabilities of supply chains. This year, it's got to be a record. There were 2,200 people there. It just really felt like a huge event. About 4 days, and they always have it at the same place down in Phoenix. IBM Watson's Supply Chain was a premier sponsor this year, and I was really honored and fortunate that the IBM folks invited me to come down with them as an IBM futurist. And then, kind of the thing that the conference is most famous for is at the end of the conference, Gartner awards their supply chain top 25 awards. Really a big deal for especially, the big companies that put a lot of focus on supply chain management to get that recognition and to have the independent validation that they're doing it right. And they're really driving value for their shareholders and their customers. So with that, I want to really run through the stuff that stuck out through me. And it turns out there were 8 points that just really hit home and stuck with me coming away from the conference. The first one is that everybody is moving or has already moved to the cloud. It wasn't that many years ago that, the cloud was People were concerned about security, right? And if all my data is up there, how do I do backups? How do I make sure that it's not being tampered with? How do I get the wrong people from getting access? It just seems like we're past all of that debate. It's not even a question anymore. Anybody that's creating new stuff is making it in the cloud. Anybody that's got old stuff is moving it to the cloud. And so I think that was really an important, I'll say, trend. And part of my concern would be, for anybody that still has stuff that they're running as an on-premise solution, supply chain information systems are big investments. And if you're not planning now for how you're going to make that translation and transition into the cloud, you're going to get, I think likely caught by surprise. So because it's coming, it just seems like it's a wave that's washing over everything. Second big takeaway, supply chain control towers are really the next big thing. I remember a couple of years ago at this same event, supply chain control towers were a really new concept. I'd been a part of a team at Caterpillar that had created their control tower called the Assurance of Supply Center. And it was a big deal. It was a big enough deal that Gartner invited our chief supply chain officer, Frank Crespo, to come to the Gartner conference and talk with everybody else about how we had done that at Caterpillar. Looking around at the event this year, there are actually several software vendors that have tools that they're really describing as a way of putting in a supply chain control tower. IBM is doing things, and their approach there is around Watson and artificial intelligence. But there are other companies, Elementum, Alloy, JDA, and CGN, all had different approaches, but all focused on how do we get to the place that we can see everything that's happening in the supply chain and be able to make decisions faster and better. And so, one of my questions coming away from it is, at what point is Gartner going to have to turn this into a software category and actually create a magic quadrant around supply chain control towers? I've got a feeling that that's not too far into our future. My third big takeaway, and I'm really excited about this, is that it looks like supply chain engineering is finally being recognized as a real job. For a lot of years now, we've been posting jobs for supply chain managers and then looking for people that had engineering degrees. And the truth is, you really learn different things if you study management than if you study engineering. And we need both in the supply chain. So I was thrilled to see an advertisement from Miebach Consulting where they're promoting themselves as supply chain engineers. I did, kind of highlight this in the section on supply chain careers in supply chain management for dummies, showing that, engineering is a career track that can lead to executive positions. One of the things that I'm expecting to see is more and more universities making the shift so they're actually offering degrees in supply chain engineering. I think right now, if you were to count all the schools that offer supply chain engineering degrees, you could count them all on one hand and have a couple of fingers left over. But I think that's going to be changing in the next couple of years. My fourth big takeaway is that blockchain is coming. Right? And everybody's been talking about blockchain. And I went into the conference really curious to see where it's at, who's doing useful stuff, and how is it going to transform supply chains. And I walked away sort of convinced that it's still going to be a couple more years before most of us in supply chain management really see or feel any kind of an impact from blockchain. The thing that I do get a lot is people go, okay, I keep hearing the word blockchain, but I don't really understand what it means or why it's important. So here's my for dummies definition: is a blockchain is just a way to create a permanent record of transactions that's shared by lots of different nodes so that no one can make unilateral changes and nothing is ever removed from the history. So it's a way that a group of people or companies can all share a record of transactions that they all trust because they believe that nobody can manipulate it. One of the other things that you can do with a blockchain is you can build in what they call smart contracts, which are basically little programs that automatically execute when a certain transaction occurs. So the idea would be when you ship product to a customer, you could log that in the blockchain, and you could have a smart contract set up with your customer so that as soon as they receive the product and record that transaction to the blockchain, a new transaction occurs where you get paid. And that all just happens automatically. Sounds like a pretty good idea. I like the idea of smart contracts. What I'll say though, when I put my my skeptic glasses on and start having these conversations with folks, is a lot of the scenarios and a lot of the use cases that I hear kind of break down, but before you get to the place that you see real benefit and real value. So the first question that I find myself asking is, okay, I can understand how a blockchain could do that, but why couldn't you do the same thing with a cloud database? And in many cases, I think the scenarios that people are proposing for blockchains, actually a regular database could do just as well as better. Not to say I don't believe that there are applications for blockchain. I just think that some of the cases, some of the scenarios that people come up with really aren't strong use cases. The other thing that I think is really important, and I think for any time we're making decisions in the supply chain, is figuring out whether the capabilities of the tool really align with our business goals. So one of the things that I've heard people talk about as a capability of blockchain is you could do faster procure to pay, right? You could pay your suppliers immediately when you receive a shipment, or get paid by your customers as soon as they receive a shipment. I can see how that could happen in a blockchain. Frankly, I can see how you could, do the same sort of thing in a cloud database. But beyond that, I don't think the reason that we extend net 30, net 60, net 90 terms in the supply chain is because our computer systems aren't capable of paying quickly. I think in most cases, the reason we do that is because it's part of how we manage our cash flow. And so having a tool that could do that isn't necessarily solving a problem. One of the other things that I hear people talk about a lot with blockchain is records are permanent, right? It's immutable. They never go away. But the reality of the way most businesses operate is we have records retention and record destruction policies. After a certain number of years, we actually dump our records, and we want to have a clean history. So I can actually see having blockchains with a permanent record running contrary to a lot of business rules that have been around for a long time, and I think it might be tough to get some of those capabilities past the rules that lawyers are going to impose on our businesses. Another challenge that often comes up, when you really talk to people about blockchains, is transaction speed. Just the nature of the way blockchains works, it takes longer for a transaction to get recorded. And if we're talking about e-commerce and retail environments, especially where you've got a huge number of transactions per second and you have to be able to handle peaks, I'm really not sure that blockchain is the right tool for many of those situations. And last but not least, the reality is in any kind of a business, we have to deal with policies, regulations. We need to have ways of resolving disputes. So blockchain may create some additional transparency, but I think we also need to see, what sort of rules and what sort of policies are going to emerge out of blockchain, and how we're going to handle disagreements when they come up, because nobody goes into a business transaction thinking they're miscommunicating. My fifth big takeaway is that artificial intelligence is actually already here. I heard a lot of stuff about AI and machine learning that really blew me away. The IBM Watson team, Sherry Diaz, shared with us that Watson can read all of Wikipedia in 4 days. And if you think about that in terms of global trade, or I'm thinking about MSDSs and workplace safety, and all of the rules around slotting in a distribution center. It just really seems to me like a tool like Watson is actually maybe better suited to ensuring that companies comply with all the rules and make decisions quickly than people. And so I think we're going to see a lot more happening pretty quickly in that space. I also love this quote from my new friend Roberto from Alloy. Supply chain is an exact science with the exception of customers who apparently are crazy. And Roberto has an Italian accent, so that makes it even funnier when he says it. The last point I'm going to make here, because it's a segue into the next, is that we're really seeing this evolution in analytics. So when we started doing analytics, we were really focused on descriptive analytics, looking at a bunch of data and then trying to describe the average and other characteristics of the data. We moved from that into predictive analytics, where I'll say that's kind of a fancy name for forecasting, right? So you look at what happened in the past, and then you try to predict what's going to happen in the future. The next step beyond predictive analytics is prescriptive analytics. So based on what you think is going to happen in the future, you start to put together a playbook. You start to prescribe how you will respond as these things happen. And what really became clear to me during this event is that there is a step beyond prescriptive analytics, and that's automation. Because once you've gotten to the place that the machines are looking at the data, predicting the future, and coming up with recommendations for how you should respond, I think it's pretty natural that we'll just get to the place that we say, well, the machine thinks that's what we should do. We're just going to let the machine go ahead and do it. And then on the back end, we're going to need to be able to diagnose and to learn with the machines about how those decisions played out and how we could do things differently and better in the future. My sixth big takeaway, analytics and the Internet of Things are here in a big way. I'll say I'm seeing, even though some of these companies are relatively new, it looks like that they're built on pretty mature technologies, and I'm seeing people use them in real practical applications, which to me gives it a lot of credibility. So I won't go into details about what each of these companies does. What I will say is that if you're working in the supply chain, in particular with logistics and moving stuff by truck and by ship, be aware of Risk Pulse, Tive, and Forkites. All three of those companies have really interesting technologies, and I think, frankly, they're pretty broadly applicable to most folks and most supply chains. Seventh one, supply chain security really is an emerging theme. Scott, as you mentioned at the beginning, the work that my team and I are doing with SecureMarking, our hearts are in this space in a big way. Part of what's happening with e-commerce is while there are lots of great benefits of convenience and price, the truth is it makes it really easy for crooks to turn our customers into victims. And even when we do nothing wrong, it still eats into our profits, right? Because we're giving up revenue to a competitor who's making a fake product that looks like ours. And it's hurting our brand because very often customers don't realize they're buying a fake. They just think they're getting a great deal on something that we made, and then they're upset when the quality isn't what it should be. This is manifesting itself in a lot of different ways. Counterfeiting is one. Black market sales, where stuff it falls off the back of the truck, it gets stolen, and then it gets sold through online marketplaces. Diversion seems like it's really a growing issue, where you sell your product into one channel for a promotion or whatever purpose, and then all of a sudden you find that it's being sold through another channel without your awareness, and that creates some real challenges, especially in industries where you might need the ability to do a recall if something happens. And then the last one is dilution, and this is a really tough challenge where, for maybe you sell 10 items to a customer, and magically that customer is able to sell 100 of those items through their channels. Somehow, the authentic product is getting cut or diluted with fake, and impacting quality and really turning customers into victims. So I'm excited about the work that we're doing in this space, because I really do see a growing need, and it's really becoming not just a legal problem or a brand problem. It's becoming a problem that supply chain managers need to be actively involved with and owning. My last big takeaway from this event is, in an age of social media and online and webinars, having this time face-to-face really does still matter. Just the number of people that I was able to connect with, the number of really quality conversations that I was able to have, and the amount that I was able to absorb, by seeing and talking and touching some of these technologies up close, there's just no substitute for it. So I think the challenge is figuring out, not how to do social media or how to do conferences. I think, we need to figure out how the two play together. But for professional development and for the growth of our profession and our community, I just see so much value in being able to get together and talk and build these face-to-face relationships. So that to me was really the not just the cherry on the top, but really part of what made the conference special, and I think an incredibly good use of my time. So with that, Scott, I really want to thank you again for having me on and giving me a chance to share some of the pictures and the stuff that I learned on the trip. I will point people, if they don't know, of course, you mentioned the Supply Chain Management for Dummies. Obviously, hope everybody gets a chance to read it. Love to get feedback on what people think, and also, things that we can include in future editions to make the book more useful for them. Another thing that we have going on, I've been working with LinkedIn Learning. We have a series of courses that are coming out one a week, and it's a really quick, 4-minute tip on a topic that's useful and relevant to supply chain and operations managers. You can click on the link there to subscribe, or just go to LinkedIn Learning and look me up. And of course, I want to say another thank you to the folks at IBM Watson, and encourage everybody to follow IBM Supply Chain on Twitter to stay current on the cool things that they're doing and some of these really exciting emerging technologies. So Scott, thank you much.
Thanks, Daniel. A lot of great resources right there, and sounds like an excellent conference as always at the 2018 Gartner Supply Chain Conference. So we're going to be concluding our session this afternoon on a few final items. First, we want to invite all of our audience members to join us for an upcoming webinar session. We've got a lot of a diverse upcoming schedule of webinars focused on topics such as omni-channel for the growing enterprise, reverse logistics, lip service leadership, which is one of my favorites. Learn more at apexatlanta.org. Secondly, if you're in the state of Georgia and you want to engage the next generation of leaders, we welcome you to join us for one of our Supply Chain 101 programs, where we're taking teams of volunteers into elementary schools to talk supply chain with students. 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. Contact us for more information. You can reach out at EVP for Executive Vice President at apexatlanta.org. Thirdly, don't miss our upcoming live workshop in Atlanta with Bo Groover of the Effective Syndicate. He's going to be tackling a session on Lead the People and Manage the Process on June 15th. And finally, Apex Atlanta is very proud to be launching a new aspect to our current partnership with the Georgia Tech Supply Chain and Logistics Institute. Georgia Tech's going to be hosting and facilitating our CSCP and our CLTD training as of July 2018. Contact us for more information on this professional development opportunity at a true world-class institution. And of course, feel free to reach out to me if there's anything we can do to serve as a resource for you and your organization, evp@apexatlanta.org. Hey, Daniel, before we conclude today's session, any final thoughts on your end?
You know, the one thing that I'm going to say, Scott, is I just think it's so important for supply chain professionals to connect with other folks, to learn and to teach. And, you know, we do that through our professional associations, great organizations like Apex, and we do that through conferences like this one. So for anybody that's listening, I definitely encourage you, you know, just as a part of your plan for every year, make some time, set some money aside to get out, go to a conference, connect with other people, learn, contribute, and bring that home to make your own supply chain better.
Completely agree. Great point there. So as we wrap up today, we'd like to give a big thanks to our guest speaker, Daniel Stanton with SecureMarking, for this presentation and his helpful perspective. Be sure to check out his #1 ranked book, Supply Chain Management for Dummies. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, again, Apex Atlanta and Talent Stream. Of course, a big thank you to our audience for tuning in. On behalf of Supply Chain Now Radio, this is Scott Luton concluding today's episode. We wish all of you a safe and happy Memorial Day weekend, and we hope to reconnect with you again real soon. Thanks, everyone.